So there you go. We're all locked up in this terrible corona crisis. Social life is down. People can't see each other anymore. Sitting at home, being bored. Terrible situation. And I thought maybe I can do something a little bit to help people cope with the situation. And I did a reading of my novel The Color of the Sea yesterday in German, and some friends from Italy and England asked me to try and translate it, and so now I'm trying to do the same thing, doing a reading, a quarantine reading for you guys in English. I hope it's sufficient. I'm not a native speaker, but I try my very best. And the name of the book in German is The Color of the Sea, or Die Farbe der See, which means the color of the sea. It's been published in a small Hamburg publishing company. And I just start with the first chapter. And my chapters are all called after colors associated to the color of the sea. So the first chapter's name is Gold. This morning, the sea had the color of pure gold, a glistening surface of millions of sparkling, dancing reflections. Ole Storm had already seen it from afar, shining through the rows of trees, as he took the steep and rugged shortcut through Düsternbrook Grove, riding Aunt Elfie's old lady's bicycle down to Kiel Fjord. Now he was standing at the bank path, shadowing his eyes against the rising sun. The air tasted of salt and fishing net and last night's thunderstorm, and above him a flock of seagulls were sailing in the breeze. A smile appeared on his face. A breeze again, at last. For the last few days the sea had been the grey, oily mirror of a leaden, motionless sky. The flags on their poles in front of the venerable Emperor's Yacht Club, that now had to be called Yacht Club of Germany, had been hanging slack in the dull calm, and the 21 starboats that had intended to compete for the World Championship had been standing motionless on their stage ashore. The needle on the barometer outside the rigging shed had seemed to be glued up to the upper edge of the scale, and Father Preuss, the old harbour master, had noted gloomily that the air was as stifling as the political situation, and the curing thunderstorm was inevitable as the upcoming war. In fact, the Association of the International Star Class could not have chosen a more dramatic moment for their World Championships as this last week in August of 1939. Throughout the whole summer, territorial tensions between Hitler's new Großdeutschland and Poland had been rising. England and the arch-enemy France had felt obliged to guarantee Poland military aid. And further to the east, Stalin's unpredictable attitude had been forming another threat. Hectical diplomacy and noisy saber rattling had been alternating quickly on both sides, and much of this was fatally recalling another muggy summer some 25 years ago, when Europe once before had been tumbling towards the abyss. Ole Storm was 19. War was an unfamiliar thing to him, which he only knew from contradictory stories. Some yearned for it, as if it was promising the coming true of all their dreams, or at least the compensation of a humiliation suffered before. Whereas others seemed to fear nothing more than this, the potential end of the world. Whom should he believe? He was undecided yet. Politics is none of our business. This was what Rear Admiral von Wellersdorf had said in his speech as Commodore of the Starboard Fleet at the opening ceremony of the races. A cunning if not foolish sentence, for a high-ranked German Navy officer, in the presence of the Reichssportführer and some other big names of the National Socialist Party. But von Wellersdorf was a true sailor in the first place, and thus determined to set sailing above propaganda. Even the hosting club and the race committee had been trying hard to create a friendly and laid-back atmosphere. On the surface, they had succeeded, attracting a strong international field of competitors. But on a closer look, the shadow of what was to come already had unfolded its wings over everything. Too many bad news had piled up over the past days, and the calm, which had prevented sailing, had given plenty of opportunity to debate the steady worsening of the scenario. Small resigning gestures and a fatalistic undertone stole themselves into the discussions, and most of the competitors started realizing that sailors from different nations, who had been friends for years, would be drawn onto hostile sides overnight. A hint of farewell was omnipresent. Especially the many German and British naval officers taking part in the races knew quite well that all too soon they might have to face each other in a fight over life and death. Ole noticed this atmosphere, but wouldn't let it pass on to himself. His own small world was still in balance. The political and ideological implications seemed to be distant and unreal, especially on a clear and bright morning as this one. Grey-bearded ghosts that vanish once the breeze picks up over the waters and blows away the morning mists. So, in good mood, he swung himself onto the bicycle and started pushing the pedals. Ole Storm was not tall, but quite a sportive stature. The dark shock of hair, whose stubborn strands kept falling over his forehead, was a heritage of his mother, who had died shortly after his birth. The remarkably clear blue eyes were those of his father, who was a fisherman over at the island of Amrum. He too had passed some kind of Frisian pighead on to Ole, along with a lack of willingness to make more words than the absolute necessary. At least that was what father's younger sister kept on saying, his Aunt Elfie, who was Ole's landlady since he had come to Kiel. Ole thought that neither his mule-like character nor his taciturnity was much of a problem. His lack of words was more than weighed out by Elfie's chronical need to talk. And apart from that, he had chosen to become a sailmaker, not a politician or poet. And as for the pighead, well, this at least helped him to still be able to make his own decisions. The willing self-abandonment, for instance, with which most of his friends from the club's sailing school submitted themselves under the new rules and reeds of the National Socialist Party, was the straight opposite of his desire for freedom and independence, being so typical for a real Frisian. The strictness with which nearly all public life had been brought into line, also here at the sailing club, was scaring him. And the blistering admiration for the Führer, which for some had already taken religious traits, was strange to him and incomprehensible. After all, there was only one God, and his name wasn't Adolf Hitler. That Ole Storm still kept his own head didn't mean he didn't know about heroes. His were called Schlimbach and von Hüttler and were the finest yachtsmen of that time. Schlimbach, in his Störtebeker III, had conquered the northern Atlantic single-handed. And Walter Pim von Hüttler of Hamburg was set to win every race, no matter what kind or size the boat was. Only 1 year past he had dominated and won the last World Championship in the start class. And now, after his bullet in Monday's racing, he was looking strong to defend his title. Even though there was quite a strong competition at hand with the former US World Champion Wigenforth and the European champion Straulino of Italy. Ole would have given a lot if he could have followed this triple match from a closer distance, maybe from aboard one of the competing boats. But that was only a dream. To be part of the event, he had to take on the much more humble role as a volunteer in the shoreside organization of the racing. But on this morning that didn't matter. Today was a good breeze and there would be sailing. That was the most important thing. Now, in fact, Ole manages to get into one boat as a crew. He is sailing together with a prominent German sailor, Admiral von Wellersdorf, the rear commodore of the Star class. And the real crew member of the rear admiral was falling down a ladder trying to get into the window of a girl. So there's a free and vacant spot in the boat, and Ole is the lucky one to get it. So therefore we jump a little bit further in the book and start into the racing. Sailing conditions in Strande Bay, where the race course was laid out, were splendid. 3/4, moderate waves, and the brightest of sunshine. The minutes before the start were flying. Von Wellersdorf had decided to start at the far pin end of the starting line, after they both had agreed that this side was slightly favoured by the wind. Master Rausch had given his precious sailing watch to Ole, so now he could count down the remaining time. 15 seconds. 10. Weise is coming from above. Saw him, grunted von Wellersdorf and luffed up to defend the own starting position. 6, 5, 4. Ole's tension was close to the boiling point. Von Wellersdorf pulled in the main sheet. Ole did the same thing with the headsail. The Star accelerated and, at 0 seconds, passing the starting buoy unchallenged. Single recall? Von Wellersdorf asked. Ole turned around and tried to spot the starting vessel. Through the walls of sails it wasn't easy, but then he caught a glimpse of Undina's flagpole. Nothing up, he yelled, and a hot shot of adrenaline rushed through his veins. They had managed the best possible start. Above them, but a little bit behind, were the Star of Weise, and behind him the European champion Straulino and the spray-wetted noses of about a dozen other boats. Pim von Hütschler, who had started out of the middle, had already managed to pull out the field for a few meters. After a short while, von Wellersdorf turned to look over his shoulder. Will be nice and close, he muttered, but baffling the enemy is always the best tactics. Then he spoke out loud. We'll salute the parade. Ready for tacking? Ole kept his breath. To salute the parade meant to tack across in front of the following boats, despite them being in the right of way. If it worked, they would gain an early advantage. If not, they would have to bear away not only behind one boat, but all of them. We are attacking? He asked to reassure. Of course we do. The breeze is knocking down over here. This was something Ole had realized too, but he would have preferred to keep course until the following boats would lay over. If you mess up the tack, I'll throw you overboard, von Wellersdorf snarled. You get me, boy? Ready for tacking, Ole croaked. Having everything depending on the very first maneuver wasn't really promising. Tacking! Von Wellersdorf pushed down the helm and dived under the boom onto the new side. As he came up, he saw that Ole already was there, pulling in the jib sheet and hiking out hard to counterbalance the heeling of the boat. Water was splashing over the leeward side deck, but then the star rightened up and accelerated. For an awkward moment, Ole couldn't see anything of their opponents, but then the bow of Weiser Star steamed by only 1.5 meters behind their transom. Seconds later followed the Italian. "Well done," von Wellersdorf said. "And now, hike!" They managed to keep their top position through the following rounds, only having to let pass the 3 top-seeded boats. At the beginning of the last round, Ole realized a little change. Where before the surface of the water had been of a darker blue and the waves had slightly been steeper, they now appeared to be somewhat flatter and lighter in their color. Ole knew what this meant. The current had turned around and now came from ahead. Changing and relocating currents were common in this part of Kiel Bay, especially when you navigated close to the deeper waters of the shipping route. Ole turned around. 100 meters to port, where the water started to get shallower, there was a dark band of little waves cutting through the surface. The edge of a current. Behind it, the water still had the same look as before. So over there, the current would still be pushing into the old direction and would quicken the boat instead of slowing it down. "We should lay over and go there," Ole said without further thinking. Von Wellersdorf straightened up from his hiking position and stared at him. "Nonsense! We're way too far behind to attack. We've got to cover the following boat." As a matter of fact, von Hüttler, Straulino and Wiegenforth, who had rounded ahead of them, already had pulled away 60 or 70 meters, whereas their closest opponent, Joachim Weise, had only rounded 2 lengths behind them. "But the current has changed." To insist was insolent, but the word nonsense made Ole object. "So, you say we have the current on the nose right now?" von Wellersdorf asked, and it sounded quite irritated. "Yes, only here," Ole tried to explain. "Over there, closer to shore, we'd have a pushing current." "How the heck you know that?" Ole didn't know what to say other but the truth. "I can tell it," he mumbled, "by the color of the water." It sounded so immensely stupid that Ole immediately wanted to bit off his own tongue and spit it overboard. What he was saying was that ahead of them, a current and a former world champion plus the European champion were all blindly sailing over to the wrong side of the course, and only he, the stopgap crew, Ole Storm, knew the right way to go. Ole dug deeper on the gunwale, trying to avoid the staring eyes of his helmsman. But von Wellersdorf looked over him, concentrating on the image of the waves. First ahead, then to the port where Ole had pointed out the favorable current. "I can't see any difference," he grunted. But then, to Ole's huge astonishment, he added, "But what the heck, nothing ventured, nothing gained. Ready for tacking?" When, a short while later, the starting vessel Undine fired salute for the first ship home, von Wellersdorf only gave a short nod towards Ole. But his cool grey eyes were shining with respect. They had outdistanced von Hüttler by 100 and Straulino and Wiegenforth by 150 meters. Also in the second race of the day, they had sailed a nearly perfect race. They finished second behind the American boat because Ole had spotted a wind shift on the second upwind, and von Wellersdorf this time had believed him without hesitation. But the big news of this race result was that the favoured Pim von Hüttler and his crew Richard Kaufmann, through the same wind shift, had lost several places to only finish 6th overall. And the overall leaderboard, they now had to share the first place now with von Wellersdorf and a widely unknown young sailmaker named Ole Storm. On their way back to the club, Ole was as proud and happy as never before in his life. They were steaming along the green shores of the fjord with wide-out sails and a foaming bow. Wingefors, 30 meters to one side, greeted them with a wave and approving looks, and the rest of their opponents were lining up in a well-behaved manner in their wake. "Want to take the helm?" von Wellersdorf asked, as they passed Friedrichsort Lighthouse. Ole didn't hesitate. The rear admiral leaned back against the boom, lit a cigarette, and enjoyed, as he put it, the noble side of the trading boats. For a while they didn't speak, but then abruptly von Wellersdorf turned onto Ole. "So, you can tell the look of the water. So you can tell by the look of the water where the current runs and where the wind shifts?" Ole was taken by surprise. Yes, sometimes." "And you can tell it by the color?" The rear admiral made a vague gesture over the water. "Well, for me all those waves look pretty much the same. They are all blue." Ole was shrugging. Of course the waves were all blue. But the same? Never. The sea held so many shades of this color blue, Ole could not have named the smallest part of them. And then, where did blue end? And where did green start? Or turquoise, grey, brown, white? Deep water had a different blue to shallow water. Salty water another than fresh or brackish or foamy one. The color scheme of a long rolling wave looked completely different to Ole than the one of a short wave, or one that was running transversely towards the current. As the sky and the light from above, so the colors of the seabed below would mirror their own colors up into the surface of the ocean. Sandy ground, seaweed, rock, mud. They all would mix their own green or yellow or brown into the blue of the waves. According to the intensity of the reflections, Ole could even tell how deep the water was. Once he had seen a sunken wreck in the colors of the surface, black and green and rusty red. Another time he spotted the flashing silver of a swarm of herrings. Also, the unstable traces of wind and tide were constantly changing the colors of the sea. A slight breath caressing the surface with the slight silver ripples. A strong gust of a gale-force wind that brushed the water in a sinister black. An undercurrent led to the surface by the rise of the seabed, causing a dull, flat elevation. Wind against tide, with its steep and angry waves and poisonous grey caps, rolling and stamping on the same spot. They all drew their own picture on the surface, in their own colours, changing the mood of the sea. Peaceful, bright, tense, angry, treacherous. Ole felt the look of von Wellersdorf's eyes. A blue, cool grey, as calm, winter-clear salt water above solid rock. The rear admiral was patiently waiting for an explanation. Ole was puzzled. He never had spent much thought on his ability to see and distinguish the many colors of the sea, to understand their meaning, to sit there for hours staring at the water, and afterwards being able to precisely recall every little difference. It was nothing special to him. He had grown up with this gift. Since he, as a small boy, had set out for the first time with his father, going out fishing through the narrow mud and ochre-colored tideway of northern Frisia. Most of the time, it's the color, Ole said hesitantly. Sometimes it's just the brightness, or the movement, or the way the surface looks. He felt silent again. He couldn't explain it any better. I just can't see it, he finished. The rear admiral nodded. You see a scheme of color and shape and can tell if it looks right or if it has changed? Yes, pretty much so. Ole was relieved that this explanation seemed to suffice for the Rear Admiral. You must have an extraordinary memory, von Wellersdorf stated, and flipped his cigarette overboard, like one of those native Indian scouts. Ole wasn't sure if this last remark was meant as an approval or rather mockery. For a while none of them said a word. Then the Rear Admiral asked, "Do you have a white shirt?" Ole gave back, "Yes, you'll need a clean white shirt if you want to dine with me and Pim and the others at the club tonight." Ole's heart missed a beat and a half. "Oh yes, and you should wash and try to do something to this chaos on your skull you call your hair. There might be ladies attending, you know." So, that's out of the first chapter, and I hope you like it, and I hope my English wasn't all too bad. Thanks.